Hey there everybody, this is Robin with Creative2xmom, and today's video is going to be what we read in the month of April. So welcome back to my channel. My name is Robin and this is Creative2xmom. This channel is all about homeschooling, parenthood, and thriving in the day-to-day. And today's video is going to be all about the books that we read in the month of April. So if you remember, in the month of March I read about 7 or 8 books, and at the time I said I really need to slow down in April and I need to get a few things done around the house. I need to get the garden done. Well, that didn't happen. I think in the month of April I still read probably 6 books. I just stayed up really late. So I did the gardening during the day and I did all the mom stuff during the day, and then I was staying up until like midnight, 12:30, just reading. So I have a lot to share with you, so let's jump in. So the first book I read this month was called From This Moment by Kim Vogel-Sawyer. Now this is a book that I didn't even remember signing up for the review, but it popped up on my email and I thought, yeah, we'll check it out. Kim Vogel-Sawyer is a well-known author that has been around for quite some time. I've read a few of her books, but not very much. She's relatively new to me. So in this book we have I want to call it a love triangle, but sort of a friendship triangle. We have 3 main characters in this book, and first of all is Jace. Jace has just lost his fiancée. She was killed in a car accident, and he is trying to figure out who he is. He takes a position as a youth pastor, and all throughout the book he is struggling with the goodness of God. How can God be good when he has built so much of his future around future ministry with his fiancée? And then we have Lori, and she is best friends with Kinsey. Those are the other 2 parts of our triangle. Kinsey is a young Amish woman who has moved into the city. She's taken a job, she's left the Amish, and she's sort of estranged from her family. And then we have Lori, who takes her in. They're very good friends. They work in the same shop together. And the connection is that they go to this church where Jace has taken this youth pastor position. So it's all about their different backgrounds, very differing backgrounds, and how they are sort of thrown together in a time where they're each working through something very different. We have Lori working through her past and her relationships with her family. We have Kinsey working through her relationships with her family. We have Jace sort of struggling with his Christianity and the goodness of God. It was an interesting book because there was certain elements there that haven't been necessarily touched in Christian literature, especially in Lori's relationship with her family. There was moments that were pretty raw and pretty honest. I think my struggle with this book was that Jace felt a little preachy at times. He didn't feel realistic. So there were parts of the book that I enjoyed, and I will say it took a twist at the end. It's not quite how you think the relationships are going to work out. Some things develop in a non-formulaic way, but his character in particular sort of drove me a little bit crazy in this book, and I just wanted to shake him and say, have a little grace for yourself, feel your emotions. But I will leave the full review down below for you to check out so you can decide if it's something you're interested in. The next book I read in April was called Raising Grateful Kids by Kristen Welch. Now this was on my spring reading list, which I will link down below, and it was a reread for me. I think it was originally a review book, and if I can find that review I will link it as well. But Kristen is sort of one of those authors that I go back to again and again. She has a real heart for the world, a real heart for missions, and for discipling her kids in those areas. And so this was one of those books where she looked at the aspect of gratitude and how we can bring that into our parenting journey. Like I said, this was a reread for me, and I still felt like I pulled a lot out of it. Kristen's very honest about how she is working through these things as she's writing. I think at the time her oldest was probably 14 or 15, about the age of my oldest, and she's reflecting on the things that they've done, the things that have worked, the things that probably haven't worked as well. For me, I still loved it. I still felt like I got a lot out of it, but it's one of those things that I wish it was more impactful when my kids were younger. Even though she was still working through it, still figuring out who she was as a parent, there were ideas in there that I thought, man, I wish I would have implemented these earlier. I think they're really good, and I do appreciate the fact that she's very applicable in this is what we believe and this is how we apply it. There's still things that could be applied in our parenting journey, and obviously my youngest is 9, so I still have lots of time. But for my oldest, there were things that I wish I would have read sooner. But very much so, still worth revisiting at this stage in our parenthood. The next book I read in April was called Plain Wisdom. This is by Cindy Woodsmall and Miriam Flawed. You guys know that I love Cindy Woodsmall. She's my favorite Amish author. This book, I'm not sure what I expected. It's been on my reading list for a really long time. It wasn't what I expected, and yet in the same way, I think it was better than what I expected. This is a nonfiction collaborative writing between these two women. Cindy, of course, is a very well-known author, and this is her real-life friend who has taken her into her home. They go through this topically about how you would deal with and how they have dealt with just life, situations in life, wayward children, struggles in their marriage, community building, death, births, their own struggles with Christianity. It's sweet, and yet it's real and it's honest, and I think that there's a lot that can be taken from it. For each topic, they each share their perspective, which obviously is going to look very different, but the commonalities there are strikingly similar. So I read through it pretty quickly. It's an easy read. It's as if you were having a conversation with these two women and they're just sharing their hearts. But I think that you would get the most out of this if you slowed down and savored it. I think this would be good for a devotion in the morning, or if you're just struggling with something and you just want to hear how somebody else has dealt with it and how the Lord has walked them through it. It's a good one. So after this book, of course, I had to pick up some Amish fiction, and so my next read was A Patchwork Past. This was another one of those books that it just happened to pop up on my email, and I thought, when did I sign up for this review book? I will link my full review down below. But basically we have this young woman, Sophie. She has left her family, and she left them carrying a very heavy secret that she just could not be a part of the Amish community anymore, and she has gone to live in the English world. And what happens is that she has, I think it's lupus, and it flares up in weeks. She needs some place to rest so that she can get back into her life, and the only place she can find that rest is by going home, which now you've got this awkwardness of family relationships that you've left very hastily. There's a lot of bitterness. There's a lot of past there that she's working with her parents and with the community, not understanding. There's a lot of secrets that are following her and sort of her reputation. And she has to kind of put blinders on, because if she doesn't rest, she could ultimately end up in the hospital. So she has to put blinders on to all these rumors that are swirling around her. While she's there, she becomes friends with a woman named Jane. She's known this woman her whole life, and they sort of reconnect. And Jane is a writer, and she has done some family research, and she starts to tell Sophie this story of a young woman, I think her name is Mary, and how she was in Chicago during the Great Fire, and what happened to Mary, what her journey was, and how she found her place helping other people through that journey. It sort of coincides with Sophie and what's happening in real time in her life, where she finds her connection and her ministry and how she wants to help people. So you're going back and forth between Sophie's life and Mary's life, and you're seeing the connection between the two women, how they're vastly different. They're separated by like 150 years, and yet how similar they are and what their journey was in finding their place. It was a good book. It was a little awkward in that it addresses some current hot topics. I'll put it that way. It addresses some current hot topics, and so it was a challenging read. It put me in the position of thinking, okay, how do I view this, is this the way in which I view it? I wanted to read it very critically, open-minded, of course, but also thinking through and not just swallowing the author's viewpoints. It is number 2 in a series, but it could easily be a standalone title, which I love because sometimes you get in these series and you get a little bit lost. But I didn't even realize it was number 2 until probably about 3/4 of the way through the book. I will link the full review down below so you can check it out. The next book I read in the month of April was Lessons at Blackberry Inn. This is by Karen Andriola. This is the second book in a series of 2. The first one was Pocketful of Pine Cones that I shared in March, I believe. And so this is sort of her series of books about nature study. Now I felt like Pocketful of Pine Cones was a little bit more focused on the process of nature study, whereas this is focused more on Carol's story. Carol's the main character, and how she teaches her children in probably 1930s, maybe early 1940s, her process of becoming a homeschool mom. It is the word sweet is the only word to describe these books. They're very sweet, and so it's a very easy read. I found myself picking this one up before bed as sort of just a calming breath of fresh air to relax in the evening. This follows her family's story and how they have moved out to the country and what opportunities she finds there to educate her children and what happens to her family. It's sort of a continuation of her story. You could read this as a standalone title, but I think reading Pocketful of Pine Cones first gives a lot of background information, and personally I prefer the first in the series, although I am glad that I got to see the end of Carol's journey. And the last book, finally coming to the end of this stack of books, the last book I read was Sacred Influence by Gary Thomas. I actually have 1 chapter left. I believe that I will finish up today. This is a reread, and it was on my spring reading list, but it's probably been about 4 or 5 years since I've read it. Gary Thomas is a very challenging writer for me. He writes books about marriage and parenting, and not that he bait and switches you, but they're very much so not about your partner, but about you and how you need to be reflecting Christ to make those relationships work. So that's what Sacred Influence is. It's how wives can become more like Christ to enhance their marriage. And he will honestly tell you, like, it's not all on wives, but because this book is written to wives, that's where my focus is. And he interrupts himself throughout this book every once in a while to say, okay, wait a minute, I'm not saying it's all on you, but just remember, this is the audience this book is written to. This book's challenging. It really is. It forces you to look at your own flaws. It forces you to look at your own reactions. And it forces you to look at your own heart. Honestly, one of the best marriage relationship books, even if you're not married, but you're in a serious, committed relationship, it will push you to be a better person in that relationship. I'm so glad I picked it up again after 4 or 5 years. A lot of these concepts were things that I just needed to revisit, things that I had forgotten. I can't recommend Gary Thomas's books highly enough. Okay, after that huge stack, we got through 2 read alouds in the month of April, and the first one was A Night Divided. And we have, trying to remember her names, we have Gerda, and we have her older brother, Fritz. They are stuck in East Germany with their mother, and the night before there had been barbed wire, there had been some regulations on crossing the border, and the night before it really closed, their dad and their brother went into West Germany sort of to check things out. They were going to come back and get the family. Well, in that process, now nobody can cross the border anymore. And you flash forward several years to where this girl is like, I can't live like this anymore. And it is the story of how her and her brother find this impossible journey of crossing the border, and they're going to take their mother with them. And it really comes down to the last possible second of getting out of East Germany before things go sour for their family. We used this in our Story of the World curriculum, and I was blown away. It starts out very bleak. It does not ease you into the story at all. I think within the first chapter their family was separated. So that was a little rough reading to my youngest, but the end of every chapter leaves you on a cliffhanger. Leaves you wanting more the whole way through. And this book is nearly 400 pages long. So to constantly be engaged in their struggle and to see what life was really like for them, this one is amazing. We got it from the library, but I really wouldn't mind owning this title. And the second read aloud that we did in the month of April was The Gold Cadillac by Mildred Taylor. This was recommended to me as part of our history journey, and I hesitate to even call it a read aloud because it's only about 80 pages long. We read it in 2 nights. But Mildred Taylor is known for her short but impactful books, if you've read any of her books before. And this is the story of 2 little girls. Their dad trades in their car for this beautiful gold Cadillac. Mom's mad because they were supposed to be saving their money to build a home, and he just wants this flashy new car. And he decides he's going to drive it down into the south to visit family. And his his brothers and his sisters-in-laws are like, well, we're going to come protect you because you are driving this beautiful car into the south and something's going to happen. And it's these 2 little girls realizing that their life in the north and the way they're viewed in the north is not going to be the same as the way they're treated in the south. And that just because they know the truth of who they are doesn't mean that everybody else is going to recognize it. And that's all wrapped up in this presentation of this gold Cadillac and their journey of realizing they still have a struggle to be seen as humans. I wish it was a little bit longer. The only thing I can say about it is I wish it was a little bit longer. You can't really critique Mildred Taylor. She's such an amazing writer, and she put so much into that 80 pages, but it just left me wanting to carry on the conversation with my kids a little bit more. But if you haven't read it and you have a 3rd or 4th grader, it is a very good book for introducing this topic. So that's all the books that we read in the month of April. I feel like I have chatted on enough for you guys, but I want to know in the comments down below what you've been reading, what you would recommend, what you are loving. My list is already growing for the month of May. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time. Bye guys.